some, which would involve some changes in the 2017 tax bill, and so much of the infrastructure bill goes way beyond what we would consider infrastructure, which in everybody's minds at least includes highways and bridges, but airports and locks and dams on the Mississippi and municipal infrastructure and broadband, and that probably doesn't cover a fourth of the things that ought to be thrown in there. Sometimes we say everything, including the kitchen sink. Out of that 2 3/10 trillion, only about 5% of it is for highways, which we'd normally finance through a user fee, the gas tax. Then everything else that you consider traditional infrastructure would be about 25% of the 2 3/10 billion. And there seems to be some desire to separate out traditional infrastructure from other things that are in the bill, and I usually only use one example of $400 billion, which would be about 1/6 of it, would be expanding Medicaid. It's just one example of a lot of things that are in the bill that are riding along with it from the president's point of view, because infrastructure is very popular and the other things may not be so popular. When it comes to the tax increases that they're proposing, most Republicans would take the view, in fact, maybe every Republican would take the view, that it should be paid for by allocating money that was in the 1 9/10 trillion dollars, of which 90% of it wasn't related to COVID, and is spent in the out years beyond 2022. Take that money that would normally be appropriated on an annual basis and give it to these projects here. Another thing, there's reason to believe that a lot of people would vote for increasing the gas tax, but we're told that the president doesn't want to do that because he promised $400,000. But he would increase the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28, which most economists say about 1/4 of a tax increase would affect wages or employment. So you'd have people making less money as a result of that. And then it would also further make us uncompetitive with international competition, because we reduced it in 2017 from 35 down to 21, so we would be competitive. But we did broaden the tax base. So without going from 21 to 28 may not sound as bad as going from 21 to 35, but he keeps a broad tax base. So you end up with a uncompetitive tax position for international trade by about the same amount if you went up to 35. And just to show you how they must consider that a problem, if you take Secretary of Treasury Yellen's virtual meeting with the nations of the OECD, and she was begging them to make sure that we have a uniform tax system globally to include where every country would agree to the same level of taxation for corporations. She's going to want that average for industrialized nations of about 22 or 23 to go to 28. So you can see that I think they see their own tax increase as quite a burden. And so, I guess I should stop with this because I don't know how much more of this you want to hear. But anyway, it seems to me that you would that a bipartisan agreement, just doing the usual infrastructure stuff. And my definition of infrastructure just doesn't say highways and airports. It says where you spend $1 today Like if you spend it on a highway today, then you aren't going to spend another dollar until 30 or 40 years when you dig the broken up highway, worn out highway, and put down new highway, as opposed to Medicaid that you're going to spend that dollar over and over every day. So we can get a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure. Now, beyond infrastructure, we're going to take up a bill that helps get clean drinking water up tomorrow, and then, but most of the period of time, except for the one big bill of 1 9/10 billion or trillion for COVID that we passed in March, most of these first 100 days has been used to get appointments approved by the United States Senate so the president's got a cabinet, sub-cabinet positions filled. Now, I talked a long time, and I don't know whether I touched on anything you're interested in.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, that infrastructure was obviously a top priority for us. Another thing that we really struggle with here is workforce. And so wanted to have one of our members, Rebecca Needs from the Green State Credit Union, ask a workforce/immigration question for you.
Sounds good. And hello, Senator Grassley. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. We so appreciate hearing from you, and the fact that you get back to all your counties in Iowa. The fact that you're accessible is a big deal these days. So on the coming out of COVID and the last year that we've had, workforce is certainly a top of mind for our business community. And in that, we're sitting at about 3.7% unemployment, which I would say is pretty darn good. It's almost full employment. But we're coming right into the growing season, and manufacturing is picking up, and all of these, you know, we are right, and building is going crazy right now. So my question is really more about immigration and the American Dream and Promise Act and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And so basically immigration, both for the short and long term as it relates to our workforce, and what you see happening in the Senate and Congress.
Yeah, well, let me address it from your standpoint, but also say that in my almost every place I go for these meetings, whether it's an open town meeting or whether it's a factory floor that's shut down or some other business, the thing I hear more about workforce is that the federal government is adding on at the federal level to the state unemployment $300, and so we're about 42% of the unemployed are making more money than if they did on their last job, and that's what people want us to take care of. But this is kind of, that issue is kind of not going to end until September 15th, when that $300 goes away. And I think the economy is going to be good enough by then nationwide, not just in Iowa, but nationwide, that somebody's going to say, well, we shouldn't be doing that again. And I'd have to say that I'm partly responsible for that between March of last year till August 5th of last year, because we had to reach a compromise to help the 22 million people unemployed. So we jacked up the unemployment by $600, and then that was supposed to be the end of it. But then, you know, you start these, you got to get 60 votes in the United States Senate, so you start negotiating, and you get the $300 thing, which we have now. But it should have ended last August, and then we wouldn't have this problem. Then on immigration, I'm going to give you both a substantive answer and a process answer. The process deals with getting things done in the United States Senate, getting 60 votes to do it. And from that standpoint, we could do H-2As as an example, or H-1Bs as another example, and I could probably give you 3 or 4 other immigration issues. But when you get a simple little immigration bill out that could probably pass with 60 or 70 votes, everybody wants to amend it with something else dealing with immigration that leads you to comprehensive immigration. Then you don't get the 60 vote rule. then on the and then, well, I guess I've answered the question why you can't give H2As in, let's see, H2Bs for more for maybe the jobs you're talking about, and then H1Bs, the professional people. So then where does that leave you with my not answering your question?
Well, I think it's a continued issue that we're going to be talking about. There are no quick answers to this one, and I know that our employers are looking for a wide variety of workforce. So from the hospital or hotel workers, restaurant workers, to people that are nurses and doctors in our rural hospitals, they really rely on immigrants to fill those positions. So it's an ongoing issue for us. I have one other question for you from David Bywater, who is the president of True Art, which is one of our heritage companies here in Iowa City. He has a question about healthcare, and this is a question that I get quite often. So I'm gonna let him ask it.
Good afternoon, Senator. Thanks for being on this call. We sure appreciate it. As Rebecca indicated, it's great that you're so available to your constituency. My question is indeed about healthcare. And before I comment about that, I will thank Jennifer for mentioning the legacy business. We're celebrating our 125th year this year, and we're pretty excited about that. One of the consistent concerns we have about the business climate, and my colleagues in the business world do too, is the cost of healthcare and the fear of premium increases. We're in a period 6 months away from our renewal, and so we're a little relaxed, but every year we get a renewal insurance premium increase that's quite hefty, and we have to figure out how we're going to live with that for the 12 months going forward. It is limiting our ability to grow. I can state that with a fact, and it's a bit limiting our ability to compete. And so I'm wondering if you can tell me what's going on in the healthcare arena today, and what's happening to try to bring in some of the cost related to this and help it make more affordable for employers.
Okay, I'll answer it from the standpoint of insurance, then something that affects the cost of insurance. First of all, how's your daughter that gave me the candy?
Oh, she's doing great. She's up at Wartburg, just finished her semester last night, and so she's a happy camper at the moment. So
Tell her hi for me.
I will do that. She'll be thrilled to hear.
I think that was 3 years ago we were at your business, right?
You have a great memory. That's correct, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, for me, my number one goal is to do something about the price of prescription drugs. And it's a bill that I got out of the committee I chair, which now I don't chair that committee because we're in the minority, but it would limit the year-over-year increase in prescription drugs to the cost of living, because the increase in the price of drugs is just abnormally high from year to year. You know, great big increases, 5 to 10%, and that impacts your health insurance. That's a positive that I'm working on, and it's very bipartisan. We could easily get 62 to 70 votes in the United States Senate to get it passed. Now I'm going to not have very good news for you, but it's hard for me to prove that this would be the result. But I think this administration wants to dramatically expand Obamacare. And the extent to which they expand Obamacare, it's going to take people out of the groups into the extent to which they do that, and there's less people in the groups, obviously the higher the insurance is going to be, and it's really going to affect what you call individual coverage. Now, I say that because how they want to do that, it isn't legislating just more people getting in, but they're going to raise the poverty rate above 4%, 400%, where people get the subsidy, and they're going to make it easier for people to get in, cover more people. So if those people were all unemployed, or no, I shouldn't say unemployed, if those people were all uninsured, it wouldn't affect what you're asking me about. But I don't see how it's going to not have the impact that I thought. I can give you a lot of ideas of what I would do, but they're not going to be favorably received in a Democratic Congress, and they control both houses. And that would be to make health savings accounts more available. I would make these short-term policies more available. I'd sell insurance across state lines. And I suppose I ought to give you 2 or 3 other reasons, but those are the ones that immediately come to my attention that I would support.
I have the impression, Senator, that you're going to be playing defense on this issue throughout the next 2 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. We'll hope for the best.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know that we started out by talking about infrastructure. Wanted to just reach out to Rachel from the city of Iowa City and Jeff. We have him on the line. We've got Kelly Hayworth from Coralville and Ryan Heyer from North Liberty. Do you all want to chime in and ask any other additional questions about infrastructure?
I can hop in, Jenny. Senator Grassley, thank you for being with us today. As others have mentioned, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. My name's Rachel. I'm with the city of Iowa City, and you have demonstrated some of the strongest support for flood recovery infrastructure projects here in Iowa City and really across the state. We are so appreciative of that, and the pandemic, some more extreme weather events like the derecho we experienced last summer. These events have revealed more gaps in some of our community's resiliency. So I guess the question I'll ask of you is, what do you believe is most important for Iowans to have in an infrastructure bill that's moving forward?
We're towards the bottom 5 states that our bridges are, I don't know whether they're considered unsafe, but they need work done on them, and maybe even some rebuilt. So I think just that statistic tells me that's the most important thing. Well, no, there's another one that, quite frankly, is the result of the pandemic bringing it to our attention, because schools have distant learning, and because we have telehealth, and telehealth now is a permanent part of the practice of medicine. We've got to have as much, maybe even broadband's even more important than the bridges I'm talking about. I think I can take one more question.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to Carol from the HBA. She has a question here in the chat for you.
Senator Grassley, thank you for joining us today. I'm Carol Bonsack with the Iowa City Area Home Builders Association. I'm sure that you have heard about the lumber prices and have heard from the National Association of Home Builders as well as other local home builders. So lumber prices have skyrocketed 250% since last spring. National average is $24,000 increase. Here in the Iowa City area with derecho, like Rachel just discussed, lumber prices are actually more closer to $30,000 increase per home. Iowa City already struggles with affordable housing, and this lumber price increase is really just making it even harder. Can you share any insights on domestic lumber production and working with Canada on a new softwood lumber agreement?
Yeah. Well, that brings Canada brings up the issue of tariffs, and we ought to do away with tariffs, number one. Number two, we should, well, now the next thing I'm going to say is something you got to watch in the future here, but it could make it worse. And I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal within the last week that with the carbon credits, which forestry and farmers presumably would get, and then you get paid, the farmers and the foresters get paid from the polluters that don't want to change their operation. To balance it out, I guess to even that out. Then, so now all the southern lumber pines that make up so much of your lumber, they're saying that they aren't going to be cut down because there's going to be a process to pay the people to keep the trees growing. So I don't know. That doesn't sound very good for the issue we have, although that's not an immediate impact that you're asking me about, but that's something to watch in the future. And the only other thing, hey, I got to go vote, you guys. I'm sorry. Is somebody on my staff on here that can carry this on?
I'm on, Senator.
Sure.
This is Sherry.
Yeah, Sherry, you'll have
Senator.
to finish. Good. Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. All right, Sherry, you're up.
Sorry, I can't really say a whole bunch about the lumber situation with Canada, so forth, other than, you know, this is just one of the many items that we have seen in our supply chain and our goods that have garnered attention. And obviously lumber, yes, we all need lumber for no matter what you're doing, especially after natural disasters. We all know that greatly. But just in standard, I mean, for any type of housing, whether you're rehabbing or new. And so we have heard from many folks in Iowa, but across the nation as well. So that's certainly taken into consideration, and I'll certainly pass that along to Joe Gilson in Senator Grassley's office if you'd like to follow up with him on that issue. And I know that we're having a meeting with Senator Grassley and the Iowa home builders in next week or the following week anyway, soon to discuss that more at length. So thank you for bringing up that important issue, and certainly very aware of that, how that all the senator was right to bring up some cautions we have on some long-term things that might not help, but in the short term, obviously trying to find ways to you know, get more lumber accessible at a more competitive price is certainly very timely. Happy to address anything else about infrastructure if you want to get a little bit more in the weeds. And I know that a lot of you deal with transportation type items or that, or if you're done, whatever, I'm happy to talk about whatever else.
Well, I think Kelly, did you have a question? I saw you unmute earlier.
Oh, yeah, Sherry, this is Kelly Hayworth from the city of Coralville. First of all, I just wanted to thank you and the senator for your assistance on our First Avenue Interstate 80 project. With the money that we received there, we've been able to expedite the project, and the DOT will be bidding that next summer. And so that obviously is an example of how important these infrastructure bills can be. It's going to have a huge impact in a lot of different ways on both the businesses in that area as well as the residents. So I just encourage the senator's continued support of the infrastructure bill, because I think there is a lot of ways that Iowans can benefit from that funding.
So I think I should clarify maybe a little bit of Senator Grassley's comments. Certainly he was talking about the whole infrastructure plan, where the president had combined all of the regular authorizations into kind of one and expanded it out to include really almost everything, and then was paying for this by rolling back the tax, and then even increasing taxes even more on some of the business tax, capital gains, those types of things. So you all know, I've worked with many of you in the past on infrastructure related. The senator has always been a champion of bipartisan infrastructure bills, but that is through regular order. Not that we couldn't come to a solution, but we need it targeted to infrastructure related items. And that's hard to do. The larger you combine things, the harder it is to make that happen. But certainly, this is not saying he doesn't support infrastructure. Obviously he does. I mean, he's a huge champion of that and knows that we want that. We also want to continue on with the successes we have seen in some of the previous authorizations on making sure that the money to Iowa has the maximum flexibility for what the needs are in Iowa. Iowa and Kansas have very different transportation needs, even though you might think they may be similar. They're very different, let alone versus the Californias, the New Yorks. And so we want to be able to maximize our money. And I think IDOT has a great working relationship with most of the cities and communities and trying to find that a way. Also, I'll bring up, just heads up, I believe this administration, and I can't remember what the new acronym is, but they've renamed the Build Grants or the Tiger Grants or whatever. It's now had many name changes. And so likely they're going to have some different, qualifications of what they're looking for in the NOFA. So just be aware that there is a name change, but be aware, and certainly we always encourage people to apply for those pots of funding for this next fiscal year. And as always, Senator Grassley's willing to provide letters of support to the Secretary on behalf of Iowa applicants.
Thanks, Sherry. I do have one other question, and obviously the president is very supportive of Amtrak, and there's been discussion by Amtrak about the line from Chicago to Iowa City. What's your prognosis of whether that could happen?
I think that remains to be seen if we have a smaller bipartisan packages that move through regular order, or does the president and the Democrats move a full program through using what's termed reconciliation, which is supposed to be a budgetary measure, but it basically allows them to push something through without bipartisan support. So I'm not saying that rail isn't going to be a part of it. I think it will, and there's been many changes, and the pandemic's really hurt Amtrak a lot. So I'm not saying rail isn't part of all of the discussions. It just depends on what gets negotiated. And they're working on kind of broader, I don't have specifics of what might be in any plan, although EPW does plan to move a surface transportation bill through that committee. Carper and Capito are working on that and hope to have a bill through it by the end of May. So that might provide a little more ideas. Then the Commerce Committee would have to act as well as the Banking Committee, and then Finance if it were to move through regular order. And then you would likely see broadband bill move out of Commerce, and you would have energy, and you would have probably more through agriculture. So I think there's a lot of bipartisan support to be had, and infrastructure, no matter what its form, is where you've seen the most bipartisan support historically and over the years on getting that done. And so we hope that can continue, so we can make sure that we can address Iowa needs and interests.
Thank you. Any other questions for Sherry? Thank you so much for joining us today, Sherry. Oh, David.
Sure.
I have one more question. Last night, I believe it was the Labor Secretary, through the OSHA situation, issued or posted that there would be issued in 2 weeks from now an emergency standard related to COVID. And as we're nearing the tail end of COVID, I have some pretty grave concerns about that. This was a news feature that was from the National Association of Manufacturers this morning. Do you have any insight as to what they're actually going to issue? Is this about recovering from COVID, or is this about more restrictions on our businesses? Do you know?
I don't handle Labor Department items, so I haven't seen that. But if you could send an email to Sherry_Kuntz@grassley.senate.gov, and I put that in the chat for everyone to have. If you can send that, and I'll send that to my colleague Liesl Crocker, and she can get back to you on what that might be, or be able to exchange. Obviously, we're hoping anything dealing with the pandemic now is still being prudent with the science, but opening back up the economy and not being more restrictive.
Thank you, Sherry. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sherry. I really appreciate your time today. It's been a pleasure. We'll put some of these questions in a chat to you, or from the chat, and get them sent to you too. So
Great.
if there's any,
and it might not be me getting back to you, or you may get it through the senator system, depending on, but never hesitate to reach out. Our offices, both in DC as well as in Iowa, either Des Moines or the Cedar Rapids offices in your area. And I know Rochelle's always happy to work with you. And then if you have any hiccups with the federal government, don't ever hesitate to reach out to the Senator Cedar Rapids office for any type of item that might be casework related. We love to help folks through the quagmire that can be the federal government, and that's what we're here for. It's our pleasure to do that, and we can't always fix things, but we can at least make sure that we can facilitate things.
thank you so much, Sherry. We really appreciate that.
Great
Thank
to
you.
talk to all of you.
Nice to talk to
Okay.
you too. Okay.
Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
All right, thank you. So for the remaining time that we have today, I invited Ethan Hellier from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to give us a quick rundown of President Biden's first 100 days. We have a State of the Union address, I think, tomorrow night. And so, Ethan, I'm going to ask you, what's in that speech? What's he going to be talking about?
Well, let me unmute first of all. And then second, I will share my screen. I will get the PowerPoint up. And while I do that, I guess I can talk a little bit about the speech. It's the State of the Union that we can't call the State of the Union. So it's just, an address to Congress. So there is, a little bit of a name controversy there. But generally speaking, it sounds like he's rolling out the second part of his infrastructure Build Back America plan. And while the kind of the part A, the first part was a lot of focus on infrastructure, including kind of a new definition of that as a human infrastructure and such, it sounds like the second plan is going to be more of a kind of a building government focus. It's going to look more at, while there's a lot of good priorities in there, we'll have to kind of parse through it and kind of read through it and really see what it's about. But there's there'll definitely be a lot of good high points in there that I think that we could probably get behind in principle. We just got to see the details of it. Think of childcare, and other kind of home care stuff and stuff like that. So definitely going to be the more progressive part of his agenda that he's rolled out. But as in most of these very large packages, there's always a lot of good things in there. So we want to take our time to go through it. And I'll talk a little bit more about what has been passed, what's in law, what you can take advantage for now as we kind of come out of COVID, or at least I certainly hope we are, and then talk about kind of what's next on the horizon as we move forward through the year. So looking at the American, I think it was revitalization plan. I can't keep all the acronyms straight, but the most recent stimulus that was passed, there was one very big notable program in here, and this program actually opens up. Well, it's going to start taking applications, or you can start filling out the paperwork Friday. It's going to open for applications Monday, which is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. And I have SBA at the top just to remind everyone that if you do qualify for this, you're going to go through the SBA. Think back when PPP was rolled out, you went through your lender. This time you're going to go through the SBA. This is a traditional grant program where the SBA, if you qualify, will give you the money. Obviously, besides being a restaurant or someone who serves food, big qualifier is that you have to have pandemic-related revenue loss. You do not qualify if you have 20 or more physical, like locations or places, or if you're a publicly traded restaurant. Generally speaking, grants are capped at $5 million per restaurant, or up to $10 million if you own multiple units. The calculation is pretty simple. You're going to look at your 2020 gross revenue, and you're going to subtract that from your 2019 gross revenue, and that will most generally be your grant amount. There's some other little qualifiers here that I kind of go into at the bottom, and if we have more questions, we can go through it. But generally speaking, you're just going to take your 2019 gross revenue, subtract your 2020 from it, and that will be what your grant number is. You're going to want to use it for payroll, rent, kind of your day-to-day, operations. You can't take the money and then, buy up another location or add on your current one. It's really just to make you whole as we, kind of make it through the end of the pandemic here. For other qualifications and kind of how they're going to roll it out, you can go to sba.gov, and they kind of have all the programs listed there. And they've actually done a lot better job recently of kind of, breaking it down and explaining, how this process is going to work, who qualifies first, and kind of how they move through that process. And essentially, the process will go until all the money is done. There's about $29 billion, I believe, in this fund, and they'll just run it until it's gone. Shuttered venues. This was passed at the end of 2020. It was kind of the last stimulus that President Trump signed, and then it was kind of improved upon in that first stimulus that President Biden signed. Essentially, to qualify for the shuttered venue, besides being a venue or a theater or some sort of concert venue, a place where you have bolted to the ground seats and your revenue comes from having live events or movies or whatever the case may be. You have a 25% cut in gross revenue in one quarter in 2020 compared to 2019. You qualify. Pretty simple. If you were in operation on January 1st, 2019, your grant amount is essentially 45% of your gross revenue of 2019, capped at $10 million. So again, pretty easy qualifications, pretty easy to figure out what you get. Wanted to also say on the restaurant fund, which I forgot to say, is that if you've got a PPP loan in your restaurant, you don't have to worry about that. You can still get the fund. They'll just take the PPP loan off your grant amount. So back to the shuttered venues. Again, this is through the SBA. So it's a traditional grant program. You don't go through your lender. You don't have to worry about the forgiveness process. It's just money coming from the federal government. And again, like the restaurant fund, you want to use it for day-to-day sort of, operations. Again, you're not buying another venue. You're not adding on to your venue. You're not renovating. You're just keeping yourself whole. And like the restaurant fund, go to the SBA's website, and they can break down kind of a qualifiers and who is on the priority list first. They re-rolled this out over the weekend, and it sounds like it's up and running and should be ready for people to apply. Employee retention tax credit. This was another program. This has been around since the CARES Act. It was kind of unknown because you couldn't get a PPP loan if you went the tax credit route and vice versa. That's no longer the case. It's still a little under the radar because it's a little more complicated to file. It's through the IRS, which we all know is fairly complicated. But what you're going to want to do is, if you do qualify, is you want to work with your bookkeeper or whoever your tax accountant is, or if you use one of those softwares. If you have a greater percent, or if you have a greater than 20% decline in gross revenue, and you have less or equal to 500 people working for you, you'll more or less qualify. The grant amount is 70% on $10,000 of wages per employee per worker. So what that equals out to the whole year of 2021 would be about $28,000 per worker. So what you would do is you work with your bookkeeper. He or she would contact the IRS. And essentially, they would work to get you this tax credit, and it's a refundable tax credit. So if you qualify for more than what you owe in taxes, they'll just write you a check. How you get the money now is essentially they would just bring down your tax burden for 2021. But if you qualify for more than what you owe in taxes, they'll actually write you a check just like they would on any sort of refundable tax credit that anyone applies for. State and local funding. I'm sure probably most have seen this now or know what their city is getting, but generally speaking, the funding is to cover any sort of holes in your budget that COVID created. However, besides the COVID holes, you can also make investments in water, sewer, and broadband. You can't use it to backfill any sort of pension obligations. I don't think that's a big deal in Iowa. That's kind of more poked at New York or Illinois. And you can't use it to offset tax cuts that were enacted after March 3rd. Looking for a little clarity on that. That's a little confusing. I think local governments and state governments need a little more explanation of what that means. Obviously, we all know that tax cuts is spending because you're spending the money to give the money back. That seems kind of counterproductive, but that's how it's looked at on the revenue sheet. The state of Iowa is getting almost $2.7 billion. Iowa City, $7.39 million. And Johnson County, $29.31 million. On top of that $2.6 billion coming to the state, The state's also getting $371 million for childcare, $8.5 million for Head Start programs, $816.3 million for K-12, and $365.5 million for higher ed. So now to get to the second part of your question, where we talk about, we kind of talked about what's been in the first 100 days. A lot of it was rescue, getting, vaccines out. And obviously now anyone who wants a vaccine can get it. We've kind of surpassed the rescue period and we're on to that, like recovery period and building the economy from here. And one of the ways that we see this happening, and I think most members of Congress and the president, we just, disagree on some details, but infrastructure. The president's plan, he wants to fund infrastructure for raising the corporate rate. And the senator brought up a great point, and he's absolutely right. We did lower the corporate tax rate quite a bit. Went from 35 to 21%. However, in that process of lowering the tax rate, there was tax reform, in that a lot of businesses, C corps especially, lost a lot of their kind of credits and tax broadeners. So really, it's not an apples and orange comparison to say, well, 28 is still less than 35. Depending on what your tax situation is, it could be quite a bit more. And just that said, is that infrastructure isn't normally funded by corporate tax, and I don't think now is the time to start it. We should really be looking at user fees. There's also opportunities for a public-private partnership. While that's a little bit of that's just a little bit of the funding, it's still crucial and part of it. And we want to make sure that any projects and any sort of infrastructure bill we do, that we're also trying to streamline this process. It's still, while there's a little bit of the during the Trump years, that they're able to kind of speed up the approval process of these projects. And obviously, if it's faster getting approved, it's going to end up costing less and it's more efficient to get done. There's still a lot of work in that avenue. And that definitely needs to be a part of it. And kind of like I said at the start, there's a lot of things in this, infrastructure program that we would probably support at the U.S. Chamber, when you're talking about home care, whether it's senior care or child care, but we believe it should be separate from infrastructure. If we really want to get something done, we kind of got to laser focus here and kind of look at more of the traditional aspects of infrastructure. And then we can move on to child care and other sort of, other priorities. But really, we should be looking at roads, bridges, broadband, any sort of water port, airport. So it's more of your traditional definition. Immigration, another great topic that was also brought up with the senator, and that's also sticky. I believe it was Rebecca. She brought up two bills that actually have passed the House and we were both in favor of. But that's unfortunately where they've stopped. And like the senator pointed out so smartly, is that while those bills standalone would obviously most likely pass Senate 70, 80 votes, the Senate, what they would do is, like you said, they would, add-ons, and a simple, little immigration change would all of a sudden turn into some giant, conglomerate that maybe only 35 people would support. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation. It seems like we're going to have to go for an all or one approach. And our approach is this, is that we want to protect Dreamers, TPS recipients, and then the H4 dependent spouses. And those are the spouses of H2A, H1A, H2B workers that already have work, authorization. We want to make sure that they have that through that process. Border security would like to see ramped up. We'd also like to see some cap increases on employment-based visa programs. Also, not give the White House and the president so much authority of caps of how many numbers can come each year, and have Congress set that and have a little more stability to that number versus always kind of wondering, oh, what's the cap increase going to be this year? And then obviously make tourism quite a bit easier as well. I think we need to get some more border folks on the nation's ports to make sure that the travel process is faster and quite a bit easier. Then we have the PRO Act, and this is where we really separate ourselves from President Biden and some of the work that he's doing. You've probably heard of the PRO Act. It's crazy labor laws on steroids. The one good thing is that as long as the filibuster is in place, it probably has no chance of passing. But as we'll get to it on the next slide, there's a chance that the filibuster may go away. Now, the PRO Act, just to kind of give you a general idea, and this is only some of the negative things in there, kind of the top line, but I could go on for an hour. But you probably heard of card check, which is where workers need to publicly sign their cards instead of using a private ballot to say they're either in favor of having a union or not. That's in there. We obviously don't like that. It would also make businesses turn over private, information about their workers, whether their names, home address, personal and cell phone numbers, email address, schedules, and that sort of nature of businesses would have to turn that over to unions. It would get rid of all the right to work laws in the 27 states that have it. Businesses would no longer have standing cases before the NLRB, and it would hinder workers' ability to work as independent contractors. You've probably heard of the ABC test. Essentially, 3 separate ways you got to go through to see if someone qualifies as a independent contractor. And most people who do work as an independent contractor would probably no longer qualify. You think of people who work for Uber and Lyft, or you think of a freelance journalist. A lot of those folks have a problem with this ABC test because a lot of them like being a contractor because they get to pick their own hours, their shifts, and all that good stuff. And if they're employee of the company, then it's a whole different ballgame. And then also it would prevent workers from decertifying a union even if they're not happy with it. So a lot of bad things in this PRO Act. We can talk more about it if you want. Right now, it doesn't have the support to go through, but about 40 senators, I believe, have said that they support it, and almost every House Democrat. So it has a lot of support, but not enough at this time to get through. Which brings us to the filibuster. So obviously, everything has kind of come around to the Senate as we've talked about, and we support the filibuster. And it's simply, well, for many reasons, but simply be broken down to this. Businesses, and I think everyone on this call would say that the number one thing that businesses support is stability in their government. And essentially getting rid of the filibuster gets rid of that. It'd be very easy for every time a new president comes in. A lot of times a new president comes in, so does a new Congress. And what are the first couple of things they do? I mean, even now, even with the filibuster, every president comes in, they have, we're going to do all these executive actions in the first 100 days, and we're going to reverse all this that the last president did. That would essentially give Congress the power to do the same thing. So we get rid of the filibuster. It only takes 51 votes in the Senate, to pass everything. So Democrats are in charge. They can pass their wish list. The GOP eventually comes in because we all know how Washington switches back and forth. Not only does everything that we've been working under go away, then the GOP's kind of wish list and laundry list comes through. Mitch McConnell gave a speech where he kind of can sum it up better than that. He said, if you don't like constitutional carry, or if you don't want to keep the tax rate at 21%, he listed off a lot of GOP priorities. It essentially said, if you don't want that, you're going to keep the filibuster, because if you don't, we come in power, we're going to do it. So kind of like I said, we want stability in government, and the filibuster gives us this. And it also, as partisan and divided as Washington seems, it keeps Washington together in the fact that in order to actually get something done and signed by the president, you have to work with both sides. And when you do that, a lot of the times what you get done ends up staying in law. So on that note, I think we can go to questions or comments or anything else.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us that perspective. And it's always good for us to hear kind of what you're thinking as the biggest business lobby, and would love to hear questions from our members now. Anything? They're all speechless. Ethan, you did such a good job. They have no questions.
Well, I'll say this just because it's still relevant. PPP is going for about another month. So if you never got a PPP loan and you think you need to get one, you have until the end of May to apply. If you got one and you qualify for a second one, I believe it's a 25% cut in gross revenue compared one quarter to the other. It's still going. And while PPP will go to the end of May, chances are the money will dry up prior to that. And I don't foresee any more money going back in or PPP being extended. So if you've been on the fence, I would take the leap now.
Well, thank you. I see that we have about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to open it back up, make sure that you guys have your questions answered if you have them. Otherwise, thank you so much, Ethan. Really appreciate your time. Ethan and the U.S. Chamber provide, a really awesome recap of what's going on in DC every week. So I told Ethan that during the pandemic, that along with a few other different organizations provided me with so much information. So really appreciate keeping us on top of the things that are going on. All right. Well, with that, just want to remind you that Senator Ernst's forum is bright and early tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. I hope you all can join that as well. We will be talking about the same 3 topics with Senator Ernst tomorrow. Immigration, infrastructure, and healthcare. We'll change that a little bit with Miller Meeks on Thursday because the immigration bills passed the House. So we will be focusing on infrastructure, earmarks, that sort of thing with her. So would love to have you join us for those. And if you haven't signed up already, you can go to iowacity.com to do so. So thanks again, everyone.
Hey,
Good to see
Jennifer?
all of your faces. Yep. Go ahead,
You know
David.
what committees Senator Ernst serves on? She's on small business,
Yep.
correct?
Mhm.
Is there something else? Is she on armed services maybe?
Yes, I was gonna say she's on armed services.
And
Yes.
small business.
Mhm.
So the questions from the business leaders would be particularly appropriate to her. So
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And she has been working really hard on childcare. So I may, if you guys don't chime in, I'll ask one of my childcare questions because I can't let anybody go by without at least one childcare question. So all right. Well, thank you all so much. I will see you tomorrow, I hope. And Sherry, if you're still there, thank you so much.